Hey, it's Marthea Pitts, the MSW coach. And I have a question for you. I'm just pinning a comment and I'm going to jump right into it. My question is, what type of macro social work do you want to do? Right? It doesn't have to be super sophisticated, your response. Just tell me, what type of macro social work do you want to do? What population or issue do you want your work to impact? So drop it in the comments if you're watching this on replay. Drop it in the live chat if you're catching it live. If you're listening to it somewhere on my podcast, DM me on Instagram at _MSW coach and tell me, what type of macro social work do you want to do? Specifically, what population and issue do you want your work to support? And how do you want your day-to-day work to look? Let me introduce myself real quick, and then I'm going to jump into why being able to answer that question is so important and why it's the very first step that I do with every last one of my coaching clients. But today I'm going to share with you 3 reasons why you have to be clear around what type of macro social work you want to do. So, hey, for those who are new here, because I know new people find me every day, my name is Marthea Pitts. I'm known on the social work streets as the MSW coach, and I help social workers pivot from case management jobs to macro social work jobs, just using the degrees that they have and the case management experience that they have. As of today, I've helped well over 180 social workers make the pivot to macro social work. So if you are new here, welcome. If this is your first live, your first video, your first podcast episode, I encourage you to grab my free e-course at macroandpaid.com. The link is in the bio, it's in the description. Start learning more about macro careers, and I have a whole e-course to break them down. I talk about salaries, job titles, employers that hire macro social work. I debunk the myth about the fact that you don't need a license to do macro work. So it's a great place to start. But the reason I'm asking today about, and I have notes, so I'm looking down, what type of macro social work do you want to do? And I want you to explain it to me in your own words, is because what I see often from current macro social workers or aspiring macro social workers who have a desire to do macro level work is that a large part of the reason why they haven't been able to pivot into macro level work prior to working in me, one of the reasons is largely because they are not clear about what they want to do as a macro social worker, right? So how do I know this? Anytime I meet a new social worker, one of my first questions to them is to understand, do they know what type of macro work they want to do? Right? You don't necessarily have to know in order to work with me, but it helps me understand where people are starting. So I'll ask them, what type of macro work do you want to do? And their response is always very broad and general. It lacks specificity, right? And so I want to talk about why a lot of social workers are very broad and general. And I also want to break down for you the 3 dangers in not being clear. Okay, Brown. In general, I want to encourage, empower, and inspire others while providing resources to help strengthen their confidence. Okay, Brown, I like that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the importance of clarity, right? And I'm going to give you, because you responded, I'm going to give you a few tips on how to make that more specific, right? Because the whole purpose of this conversation is a lot of social workers are experiencing occupational vagueness, right? So it's just a fancy term I wanted to include today for my workforce development background, but I'm going to break it down. What this looks like is when I ask social workers, what type of macro work do you want to do? A lot of them say policy, right? And so then I start asking more questions to see how specific have they gotten around what type of policy, what population. Some people aren't always able to answer that question. So then my question is usually, what issue are you seeing either in your day-to-day work or in your life where you feel the policies that guide that thing need to be changed? right? So a response will be like, I asked someone this the other day on a social media platform, actually today. I asked her what area of policy specifically, because she said she's been stuck in her case management job. And her response was, I see that a lot of programs don't get sufficient grants and families don't get resources. I love that. But in order to be able to identify the macro jobs you want, and I'm getting into the whys, but being able to identify the macro jobs that you want, being able to write really good resumes, being really good, doing really good in your interviews to get job offers, being able to advance in your career, not just getting stuck in the cycle of taking any old job like a lot of people have done with their case management job. You have to get a little more specific than that. Right? So for me, I'm just going to make up an example, but my background is in workforce development. If I would have said that I feel that workforce development programs don't get sufficient equitable funding, then instead of me just saying programs don't get funding, I should say specifically workforce development programs that work with serving welfare transition participants. What I notice is a glaring inequity between regions that serve populations from a different demographic versus the populations that look like me. And I kind of remixed a lot of like what I really am interested in my professional career. Right? But you notice how I shift from just saying grant funded to I'm naming the specific issue, and I'm very specific about the population. So we're not going to get too deep in the weeds on clarity because I have a whole framework around it. But I wanted to give you an example of why clarity is so important. Because if you just say a very generic thing, you don't know what you're looking for. So an example is one of my coaching clients, when she first started working with me for years, she had been trying to get a macro social work job. She had been like a school social worker for a long time. And she said that every couple of years she would try to get a macro job. So when I asked her, I said, well, what type of macro social work do you want to do? She was like, I want to do research. I was like, okay, what type of research? Now, keep in mind, she has her master's of social work degree. She has years of this case management, direct practice work. She didn't have, because, normally when people hear research, they think doctorate, a PhD or something like that, or a DSW. No, she didn't have any of that, but she was always interested in research. So once I took her through the clarity framework and we got very clear and specific around what population, she realized that what she wanted to do was research around immigrants. But even just saying immigrants is not specific enough, right? What is the issue that the immigrants are facing? So for her, it was integration into American society, like providing them with the sufficient resources to integrate into American society. All of this was pre-new administration. Keep in mind, I think she came through cohort 6 or 7, and she ended up landing a macro job in a research institute where she was working on a research initiative where they were doing research on integration for immigrants. However, she would have never been able to identify that job if she wasn't clear and specific. So that's the whole point of being clear and specific. Being clear and specific is very important. I'm going to break down to you 3 reasons why. Okay, so the first reason you have to be clear and specific, a lot of it I've already talked about, but I wrote it down. We're going to go through these notes today, okay? So the first reason why you have to be clear and specific is clarity ensures alignment. I always like to use this analogy, right? Maybe let's say your person, whoever your person is, calls you and says, I need you to go to the grocery store and get me an item from the grocery store. You get in the grocery store. We know grocery stores have 30 aisles. It's filled with meats, cheeses, gourmet items, produce, all of the things. And you get in the grocery store and you're like, I can't find the item, but you can't find the item because they didn't tell you what to get. They just said, get me an item, right? You wouldn't get in the grocery store and say, I can't find anything. There's nothing here, because there is. It's 30 aisles of things, but you don't know what you're looking for. They didn't tell you if they needed a seasoning. They didn't tell you if they needed cheese. They just said, get me an item. That's the same thing with jobs, right? It's specifically macro jobs. If you want to get jobs that you like, jobs that you've always wanted to do, jobs that you can see yourself building like a sustainable career where you're not moving every few years, jobs that are highly aligned with like the change maker mindset that you have to be clear and specific so you know what you're looking for in your job search. So the first reason is clarity ensures alignment. If you say, I want to work with immigrants and helping them ensure that they have programs and services to effectively integrate, again, this is pre-administration, integrate into society, you are now clear on what type of job you're looking for. So that's reason why, number one, it helps ensure alignment. The second why is that clarity helps you identify your experience. Okay, so we're going to run with the same example from my coaching client, immigrants and integration, right? So as case managers, I know this because I used to be in case management for 5 years before I landed my first macro job. You do a multitude of things in the span of your workday. Even if you have worked with different populations in different settings, right? Your title could maybe be something like intake coordinator. And technically on your job description, you're just supposed to be coordinating the intakes and taking the people. I'm making up some stuff, but it's real. Coordinating the intake, coordinating maybe even discharge. But we know as the intake coordinator, you also are collaborating with the insurance department to ensure that your people got enough coverage to even be brought into your organization for assistance. You are coordinating with the doctors to ensure that the people are going to come around and do rounds with your patients. Now, keep in mind, I never worked in a healthcare setting, but I served a lot of my coaching clients are medical social workers, right? So you are doing a multitude of different things. You're not just sitting there all day helping people complete intake forms. You're talking to the people around. They're like, I can't pay my copay for my prescription upon discharge. You're talking to pharmaceutical companies to help them get subsidies to pay for their prescription. You're doing a multitude of different things over and beyond intake. So clarity helps you be able to identify and extract what experience out of all of the stuff they've had you do as a case manager that you can take and use to get the macro job you want. And I'm not going to get super deep in the weeds, but I'm going to give you an example because I'm my coaching hat on today. Today was office hours. I've been meeting with my coaching clients all day. So an example of an experience, if you are an intake coordinator, at some point you touched a person who was an immigrant. Let's say you're interested in immigrant integration. I actually have a coaching client. She is interested in self-payers because in her case management work, she worked with a lot of people who were undocumented. And she saw that there was a gap in the service delivery in the community health center that she worked in, where people who came in and didn't have health insurance coverage, they were essentially going without care. However, her center was giving them, they were either having to pay out of pocket or they were going without treatment. So when she went through my clarity framework and how I helped her get clear, because she didn't have this language before working with me, was that what she was interested in is what they call on a macro level a self-payer, right? Someone who is not either eligible for health insurance or just doesn't have health insurance. And what she discovered after she got clarity on what the issue was that she was interested in macro terms, she then learned, again, because I have a whole process to teach them how to find macro jobs after you get the clarity. What she learned was there's this whole ecosystem on the macro level where all they are doing work around is problem solving the barriers and issues that self-payers are facing. So self-payers, even that can be niched down a little bit more. So with the self-payer, it can be an entrepreneur. It could be a student who's aged off of their parents' health insurance. But then there's this subset of the population that the macro organizations that focus on self-payers work on, and one of them were immigrants, right? So they're looking at insurance, they're looking at advocacy to get included into state health insurance, because she lived in California, which is a very, very progressive state. They have tons of macro organizations. If you live in California, really anywhere, but really in California, they have tons of macro employers. So she found a ton of organizations that are doing work just on self-payers. Universal health care was another aspect of that work, right? So clarity helps you identify what experience does she have as a community health medical social worker that will appeal to these macro employers. And her experience is that she served immigrant self-payers in a community health center. So then in her resume intensive with me, I teach her how to write her resume based on that experience. Nye says, love that. Yes, Nye. Reason number 3, why clarity is important. Why it has to be your first step. Because no one has clarity. I even had to go through this process. This is why I created the framework in my cubicle, what I think it was 8 years ago, 9 years ago, as a case manager with 120 plus caseload. When I decided to become my own career coaching client, I got to get crystal clear on what it is I'm looking for. Because I knew I'm not going to go do like a duck goose chase and try to just apply to everything. I'm not going to be spamming employers. I'm very strategic. So the third reason why you have to have clarity is that clarity helps you create highly optimized career marketing materials and job search strategies. Have you ever actively started looking for jobs and you felt all over the place? You're just like, oh my gosh, this is just too much. Or have you been actively applying for jobs and you get a lot of no's? Right? I hear people, they have experiences where they're like, I applied to 100 jobs and never got an interview. A large part of the reason why is because they don't have clarity. So what that looks like on the surface is spamming employers. That's what they call it. Where you just apply to everything that's on the job board. Even though you have never worked in the thing, you're not interested in the thing, you're just applying to whatever is available. That's not a strategy, right? And that is a sign that you don't have clarity. Because again, go back to the analogy if you were here earlier that I used about the grocery store. If your person sent you to the store to get one item and they didn't tell you, so you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to go in there and buy 50 items that you don't need. Right? But however, that's what the approach people take in their career. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what they qualify for. So they apply for everything. But what happens is, and this is the silent things that people don't name, but I name it for my coaching clients, is you are increasing your emotional, I don't know, I'm not clinical, I'm a macro social worker, but you're increasing your exposure to emotional lit downs. There's an emotional side of job searching. So why set yourself up for failure where you're applying to stuff that doesn't match? You are just increasing the probability of you getting no's. But when you know what you're looking for, it decreases the no's and increases the yeses. That's why my coaching clients, they can apply to 2 jobs straight out the gate. They're going to get an interview for one because they've done all of the work on the front end to ensure that they are only applying to aligned positions. So the third reason why is that clarity helps you create highly optimized career marketing materials and strategies. You know what types of jobs to go after. You know what employers to target. You know what experience to put on, to how to word your experience on your resume and your cover letter in a way that appeals to the macro employer. So if my coaching client went with her resume and said, I served undocumented people in a community health center, that's not going to appeal to a macro employer because they don't use that language. I told you the term they use, self-payers. That's just a very simplistic example, right? So it helps you create these very highly optimized marketing materials. It helps you excel in macro interviews. Macro interviews are not about, so tell me about a time when. All right, you know how a case management job, drop in the chat a 1 if you ever been asked the question of, tell me about a time when you dealt with irate clients. Tell me about a time when. You're welcome, Goldie. Tell me about a time when. That's not the type of interview questions you get for macro jobs, right? You get questions around your expertise. Thank you, Brown. You get questions around your expertise. And your expertise, how you identify what's important to them, is by doing all of the stuff that I just named. Thank you, Goldie. So your resume, your interviews, your cover letters, all of that has to tell a focused story. And all of that originates from clarity in the beginning, right? So you have to make it easy for employers to say yes, because you've already done the work of explaining how your experience fits. I'm trying to stick to my outline, okay? So, a question that I want to ask you all, and those who have been engaging on this live, drop it in the chat. Let me know it ain't no right or wrong answer right now. Now, if you're working with me, it's something a little bit different, but I help you get to the right answer. But I want to know, I changed my reflection question. Let me back up. Your homework. So what I want you all to do is test if you have clarity, right? So I want you to test if you have clarity. And this is actually an exercise that I give to my paid coaching clients. How the most simplistic way to test if you have clarity without having access to me is I want you to identify a family member, a friend, or someone you trust who is not a social worker. Now, don't go ask your social worker bestie. Don't ask your social worker mentor. They can't even work in social service. So not a social worker or anyone who works with you. Go to them and tell them what type of macro social work you want to do. Tell them in your own words. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. It doesn't have to be super scholarly in nature. Just tell them in your own plain language way what type of macro social work you want to do. And then ask them to explain back to you what they heard, what they understood you, what they heard you say. So essentially they need to repeat back to you what they understood from what you explained to them. And if they repeat back to you something that doesn't make sense to you, or they're struggling to explain it back, that is a sign, a clear indicator that you don't have clarity. You know how I know I've had clarity on this live with that example I gave earlier? Who was it? I think it was NY9. When I explained the example of workforce development, the difference between the vague description saying grants and programs, and then I broke it down to workforce development. As soon as I said that, and I said, thank you for that. That was good, or something like that. Oh, she said, love that. I think your pronouns are she. That's how I know I have clarity. But if a person that you love repeats back and is like, I don't really understand that, or they say something that's completely left field than from what you're thinking in your brain, that's a sign that you need clarity. So that's your homework. I'm going to repeat the homework. Because for some reason, social work is like, they remember everything else about everybody else's life, but sometimes they forget about the stuff for their own business. So I want you to test if you have clarity. How you're going to do that is you're going to go find a family member, a friend, someone you trust who is not a social worker, who doesn't work with you, who doesn't work in social service. And I want you to tell them what type of macro social work you want to do. And I want you to then ask them to explain back to you what they understood based on what you said in their words. And you're going to cross compare what you told them and what they said. I'll give you an example. The last time I gave this exercise to my coaching clients, It was a little bit in reverse. We were doing it regarding professional branding, but it's still the same type of exercise that I use. I told my coaching clients, tell their family members what they do as a macro social worker, or ask their family members what do they currently do as a social worker. And one of my coaching clients, he's for years been a clinical therapist. And he said that his sister, who he's super close with, he sees multiple times a day, like they are super, super close. She was saying that he's like a medical something that is not clinical. And I said, that's because you have not explained to people properly what it is that you do. So it's the same exercise, but it's just a little bit different. We're looking for clarity. So I want you to explain on what you do, and I want you to see what their response back to you is. And what you can do is you can come back to this. Goldie is laughing. Yeah, I tell my people, I was like, your family members and friends don't, and it's true for y'all, the people don't know what y'all do. I hate to break it to you. You got all the letters after your name. You've been on panels. You've been on the wall for Employee of the Month. But if you go ask your family member right now what you do for work, they will probably just say you're a social worker or you work at such and such down the road. They're not going to say you're credentialed in all of the latest techniques and theories and all of the different things. They don't know because you haven't done a good enough job to explain to them. So think about that. Because the people you love, the people you trust, the people you talk to every day or see regularly who know you, don't even know what you do, how will an employer that you are trying to get to see your value add to their organization, how are they supposed to know what you do? But it starts with clarity, because a lot of people don't know how to explain what it is they do. That's why people just say, I'm just a social worker, or I'm just a case manager. They don't know how to explain the difference between, well, actually, I work with the aging population in a federally funded community health center, right? They specialize in people and we get reimbursed by the federal government. They don't know how to explain that because they don't know themselves. Well, now we get into the weeds. So I want you all to do that homework. Find me somewhere on social media. You could come back to this live. I'm going to leave it up and drop it in the comments and tell me the results of your homework. Goldie says he got a job that is all she knows. That's all. He actually was offended when she was like, no, I don't do none of that. He was like, I come and tell you all the time what I do. She had no clue. None. He was offended because they are super, super close. I say, yeah, because you ain't been telling the people. Okay, you don't know how to explain it in a way for them to understand. But he learned by the time he was done working with me. Okay, so also I wanted to personally invite you to the webinar that I'm having on August 12th. Like, if you're ready to start taking the next step and better being able to explain to employers what it is that you do, but you first need to understand, what are you doing that is valuable to macro employers? And so that's why I'm having a webinar on August 12th. It's a Tuesday, where I'm going to be breaking down the top 5 experiences that every social worker has that makes them qualified to get macro jobs. The investment is only $25. And I'm going to be breaking down the 5 experiences. And what I mean by that is, I gave you an example earlier where my person is working with the immigrants. That's what made her qualified for the macro job that she got. But in this webinar, I'm going to be breaking down 5 experiences. I'm going to be showing you actual job posts, real job posts that are still up and actively hiring. I'm going to be showing you where those experiences are a requirement for macro jobs. I'm going to be breaking down how you got the experience, and it wasn't through your degree. It wasn't through a certification program. It was through your actual case management experience. And I'm going to be talking about like how they talk about those experiences on the macro level. So it's going to be a lot of like cross comparisons, because the root of the reason why people don't have clarity is because they don't understand the value of experience they have. So what happens is a lot of social workers, when they talk about what do I want to do as a macro social worker, they always revert to what they're currently doing as a case manager. And y'all love to try to convince me that that's what you're really interested in, but it's not. All right, it's just because that's all you know you have experience in. So what it looks like is I ask my coaching clients, what type of macro work do you want to do? I want to do policy on healthcare access. Is that really? And then when we do the 3 P's framework, the clarity framework, it reveals something else. But they're saying healthcare access because they're a medical social worker or they work in a community health center. And I want to wrap this up with this. Just because you've done one thing as a case manager or on a micro level, that does not have to be the type of macro job you get. So how I always say that is, just because you did this before, you don't have to be married to it as a macro social worker. Notice the example I gave earlier of my coaching client. She was a school social worker for over 20 years. It was a long time. I didn't say that part. She had been a school social worker for 20 years. She had never worked anywhere else. She landed a macro job in a research institution as a research coordinator, working with a population that she technically wasn't working with in that job. She was working with the students. Okay? So just because you've done one thing, your macro job doesn't have to be focused on that. And all of that starts from understanding what transferable experience you have that can help you pivot into a complete unrelated area. All right, so I'm going to go, y'all. Thank you for engaging. I'll talk to you next time. Happy macro career planning. Do your homework and let me know what you find out. Bye.